Hello, today we're going to do labs 4, 5, and 6. The reason we're going to do all three in one video is because they're all in common, basically. So in lab 4, we're going to use ports A and B to control the 8 LEDs, and they're going to be blinking in lab 4. So we have to read 3 dip switches which control the blink patterns, and right here it says we need 3 pins of port A to drive the LEDs and the others of port B. Now looking ahead to lab 6 is how I'm going to decide where to put all my pins. So we're going to do this on our usual PIC 16F 84A. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw in our little uh, oscillator lines like that. Alright, now in lab 6 we're going to be using pin 1 for something, so let's just draw that out so we don't decide to use it at all. Alright, now with this blue line, let's draw our 3 from port A down to the LEDs, which, let me get zoomed in, out a little bit. There we go. Alright, so we're going to go from here at port A all the way over to these IO pins. Alright, and there's the first 3. Now the next one, just because I'm looking ahead again, I want it to look kind of over here. We'll bring it over like this. There. And then the ones from port B will color with this darker color. And we'll use these 5, 4. Now the reason I did this is so I could put all 3 dip switches on port B and just have to check one switch set, instead of having to write my code to do it all on both ports A and B. So then let's choose this orange. These next 3 pins, they're going to come over and they're going to come to these dip switches. Now I put them separated by a large margin of space, physical space, because these pins are tiny and my fingers are big, so I really need a lot of room for them. And this will allow me to flick like 3 or 4 at once, and it'll still give me the correct setting. So this is what our setup looks like so far. And this is the same for labs 4 and 5. So let's go ahead and see what the difference between labs 4 and 5 are. Okay, in lab 4, we're switching the lighting patterns. You can do it in a hash table algorithm, however you want. And we're using the 3 dip switches to control that. In lab 5, we're doing blinking speeds, and we're using the 3 dip switches to control that. So the only thing that you really have to do is change from pattern to speed. Now the one other thing in lab 5 that becomes important is the watchdog timer. And you're going to set this in your code, and you're going to set it for 1.15 timeout. And then in the first part, you're going to have all the lights on for 30.35 seconds, and then light them off for 0.35, so it'll be a really quick flash. And then you'll go into the main code. And then in part 2, you're going to activate the watchdog timer, or WDT, for 1.15 second timeout. And then you're not going to clear it at all, so it's always going to overflow and keep resetting, and you'll see this 0.35 flash every 1.15 seconds. And then in part 3, we're going to make sure that we never go back to part 1 every 1.15 seconds. So we're going to keep clearing it in our loop. Now I had the tendency to clear it in my main loop, because that allowed me to make do with 1, because I could go through 3 or 4 main loops before 1.15 seconds, therefore guaranteeing that I would always make it out. Now in lab 6, this is where looking ahead was important. I have to use the interrupt to control the lighting pattern instead of the dip switches. So there's going to be a interrupt switch that we're going to have to configure in the code. And then I'm going to use the dip switches to select the different speeds. So lab 5 remains unchanged. Lab 4 we're going to have to use the interrupt. So if we go back to our little drawing over here, this little green box that I've drawn out. Now there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can do these snap pins down here, way down here, and you're going to have to put a whole bunch of logic circuitry like debouncers and all that. Or we can use these pre-debounced switches over here on my board. And these are pre-debounced, and you just flick them up and you'll get a rising edge, or you flick them down and you'll get a falling edge. But the handy thing about that is it's already debounced for you, so you don't have to worry about it. It has all the wires already to it. So I'm going to just draw my line over to here. Now because we're just using the rising edge, we don't really care about the level, so any real switch will do, so go ahead and make do with it. And that would be labs 4, 5, and 6 and how to set up all the wires on them.